Good morning. We don't get to do too many of these morning things, right? The seminars. Any questions? So, Broken Science Initiative, what is that? Well, it's a effort to collect information about broken science and share it, explore it. Got some other ambitions and aims. Emily and I are working towards developing a curriculum for middle school kids, and you're part of that experiment. My thinking is if something can be explained to middle school kids in a semester, I should probably be able to hint at some of its importance or the scope of it to an audience of reasonably bright CrossFitters, which is an above average kind of mindset, and have something resonate. This isn't the first time that someone's developed a curriculum, a book, a course of study through experimenting with audiences or taking a lecture series and condensing it. Very often it starts with, a lecture series will start with that aim, and we're about that task here. I'm going to rip through some stuff, so I want to kind of set the stage and answer some questions, and it helps me in what I'm going to do and what you're going to do in listening to this nonsense. First of all, I didn't make up any of it. None of it's my work. None of it's the fruit of any of my labor, really. I've coalesced some material, individuals that were well aware of each other's work. Been a lot of collaboration. There's a big historical reference to this. That'll all come. But I want to make it clear that I'm not here saying that science is broken. What I'm here to talk about is broken science, and there's a lot of it. And I can speak very specifically to, because we're going to go into a lot of details, where it broke, who broke it, when it broke, the nature of the break, the consequences, who benefits, who loses, all of that's there to be looked at. But I owe it to you to talk about what I mean by broken, and I'm talking about science that won't replicate. And the replication crisis is too big an issue to go into here. Hint, hint at it being something that we could talk about at another time and place. And we can talk about where you find this broken science that won't replicate, and even the names for it, the terminology. I'm giving a little warm up here, acutely aware of the time. I've already spent 5 minutes, and I know I only got about an hour to do this, but I think we can pull this off, and I'm giving you some background here. But I'm going to refer to the science that works, the science that will replicate, as generally as just science, or modern science, okay? I don't mean science that's practiced today. By modern science, I mean science that comes out of that Aristotle, Bacon, Newton traditional trend that we all associate with technology and advancement and the wonderful achievements of science. And I need a name for the other science. It appears on one of the slides here as consensus science, and it is that indeed. It's also found almost exclusively in academia. This science doesn't work in industry, largely because of the epistemic nature of it and the very nature and the demands of deliverables. And so it's interesting, even in areas like related to the replication crisis, who was it that discovers that, who was Begley of Begley Ellis? There's a guy from Amgen that was highly suspicious of the preclinical science that was making it nearly impossible for his team to come up with successful randomized clinical trials. They were failing, and he became suspicious of the underpinnings from industry. Fields affected, psychology hit hard, but some of the best material you can find on broken science, even the term broken science is not my own. I picked it because when you would put it before us, when you put broken science into Google, what you found is others that had written intelligently, thoughtfully, with concern about science that wouldn't replicate. So we just picked that terminology. For the science that won't replicate, I said consensus science. We'll also refer to it as postmodern science. Again, a dig for sure, but not one of my own creation. I got this from Wind Shuttle and people that edited David Stove's book. But they've used it repeatedly, and I think it's reasonably accurate. I think that the schism that occurs in science that creates two sciences, and that's exactly what has happened. I think that postmodernism is more than an appropriate test. It's hard to suggest it without laughing, Gary, but I think it is indeed certainly of that anything goes mindset that swept the universities. So I knew for a while, and you know, a lot of this is inspired by what we did at CrossFit and what was going on at the university. It's really stuff for another discussion. But I'd seen academic science at work, and my upbringing, again, subject for another discussion entirely, but had me sensitive to what science is and isn't. And as we go through this, I'm gonna again cheat the whole thing here, because now I have 52 minutes. What I'm going to tell you is that I want you to pay close attention to anything relating to prediction, predictive capacity, predictive strength, okay? Prediction, 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 because it's on the subject of prediction, it's on the area of prediction that modern science, the stuff that replicates, right? That modern science finds validation, that is, becomes good, acceptable, useful, well done, you get a round of applause. Its validation comes around prediction. The fracture that created the science that won't replicate is also broken around the area of prediction. And the only rational trust you have for science, and I will make the argument for anything, comes from prediction. So I'm going to make a point of saying, you know, when I say prediction, listen carefully. And if that's all you get out of this, I think we get to the end zone even in only 50 minutes. Ready? So here we go. Dale, remove. You have these notes, they're here. Each of these slides are posters, and this is so much better than dimming the light and signaling someone to put up another slide. I know that modern science, right here, makes claim to being able to answer what comes next, because the basics of a scientific model they are predictions. We're going to cover that in better detail. But that's not the only thing that claims predictions, and these are strategies of prediction. And I even had to put consensus science on here. Had to do it. But it's interesting to look, forget about on what, you know, some of these, like the spirit board, you can use it to contact long lost relatives, right? Or find out if Janie's going to go with you to the prom, I understand. And science doesn't address things on those level, but I just pull out all the stops, and like if it lays claim to being able to predict something, let's throw it up there and look at it. And then I went on a little bit of a shopping spree, might have been somewhat of a mistake, and you're welcome to help yourself to any of this stuff, resources. I got the magic 8 ball, it's unused, do you remember that? And that would be under the crystallography. This is the only crystal ball I remember. Does anyone remember this thing? You're old if you put your hand up. Yeah. I got a Ouija board. And that's up there, spirit board. And again, all of this is free for the taking. The books I got, and what I did to myself on Amazon with this shit is really probably a mistake. Because, I mean, I've been hit up like, look, Tasiography, coffee ground and tea leaf fortune telling. Ceromancy and metallomancy, fire divination, wax and lead casting rituals with actual examples here, which is super useful. Ornithomancy, this chick watches birds take off and can tell you what comes next for you. What's up? It's pretty cool, right? And most of these people offer workshops too. Pleiadian rune casting, it's throwing of stones or rocks. The BSI, the destination code, man, if I had to be locked up with one, I'd take this one. It was really colorful, and I don't know what it's about, but it's gnarly. They had a guy, and they said that he whatever happened to happen under the influence of the rat and the pig. And I was like, well, I get it. That can't be good. Here, the future told by reading livers. Yeah, they take your liver out and go, you're fucked, right? I don't know. Palmistry, we got palm reading, Greek and Roman necromancy. Well, if there's ever a book that needed pictures, right, it'd be this one, but it's not. It's all words, Gary. The whole thing, the one book. And that's all I brought with me, and I've contaminated my existence on the net by buying this shit from Amazon. You should, I mean, really, it's crazy, this stuff. That plus it's having it sent to Santa Cruz, like I'm figured out. But let's make some important points here while I'm here having fun at everyone's expense. Modern science will distinguish itself, will hold as demarcation between itself and all other the predictive strength of its models. And that says something. I expect someone here to stand up and say, I've been doing extispacey for 14 years and it works. I'm sure. There's a lot of believers and a lot of belief here. But the beauty of modern science is that there's a demarcation between science and non-science and its predictive strength. Now, we're already into some wonderful turf here, and we're just 3 minutes in. If you look up demarcation problem or the problem of demarcation, or the demarcation issue, you look it up as a philosophical concept, and what we see is that Popper, Sir Karl Popper, chose falsification as the demarcation between science and non-science. And on the Wikipedia article on demarcation, the demarcation problem, they identify it as that it's several millennium old. So we've got a problem that's thousands of years old, and I'm going to tell you right now, we can solve it right here today at this very instance, and it's the strength of its predictive strength of its models. And we're going to talk about what a model is and how that comes to be. But that's one thing very, very important. We have a major course correction on a philosophical error at once, looking at this and the other things. The other piece here is that, so it's the demarcation, it's the basis for our rational trust and the objectivity of science comes from the predictive strength of its models. Okay? In fact, I would make the point that predictability is a cornerstone, and boy, look this up. Look what you get when you put predictability, cornerstone, trust. And stay away from all the legal trust stuff, but it's pretty easy to see that there is no trust without predictability. Okay? It is its cornerstone. Let's jump into it, because what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at modern science, how it is that this thing works. And, we're flying at a high altitude here, and I'm covering something that bright 8th or 9th graders would spend a semester on. And we're going to do it in 47 minutes now. But I want to assure you that the specifics, the distillation is correct, even if it leaves out some detail that might be of use to you. And I first want to talk about the methods of modern science. And so much is said of the scientific method, and one of the more prominent more recent academic philosophers of science, Paul Feyerabend, denied a scientific method. And boy, there's a sense in which you can understand what may have been his intent in saying that. And I'll make that clear in short order here. First, we start with an observation. It's a registration of the real world on our senses or sensing equipment, right? Geiger counter, thermometer, wind vane, you saw it, right? Becomes a measurement when this observation is tied to a standard scale with a well-characterized error. We can also call this a scientific fact, right? Now, we can map a fact to a future unrealized fact. It's a forecast of a measurement, and it constitutes a model, a scientific model. It kind of sounds like anyone could do science, doesn't it? That is indeed the case. Validation, it's derived from the predictive strength of a model graded and ranked as conjecture, hypothesis, theory, and law. And we're going to talk about those rankings. But let's look again. We've got an observation that tied to a standard scale with a well-characterized error becomes a measurement. We can also refer to that as a fact. We map that fact to a future fact that constitutes a model. These models are graded by their predictive strength, right? By their batting average, by their success, as conjecture, hypothesis, theory, and law. Now, this is sterile, it's high altitude, and it leaves out some really important pieces, and I'll tell you what they are. One is the experiment designed to do the validation is hard as hell, and it's an act of sublime creativity. And it's a genius, we know it when we see it, but it is required. But it doesn't eliminate the need for validation coming entirely from the predictive strength of the work. That part never goes away. And one of the things we hope you take away from here is that there is no model that is scientific that has not predicted or done some retrodiction that proved to be important. Absent predictive success, it's still not science. And I don't care who made it. I don't care how dire the warning. I don't care how many other scientists say, yes, this is what's coming. Until it's found predictive success, and only to the extent that it has, it's owed nothing. It's owed nothing. So let's look at some criteria that are fundamentally ineluctable implications of that method. Modern science is the source and repository of objective knowledge. Where does that objectivity come from? It comes from the predictive strength. You might be guessing this is inductive. Boy, it is. This knowledge, silos, and models graded and ranked by predictive strength. We're hearing that again, right? Graded and ranked by predictive strength. A model is a forecast. They're forecasts of a measurement. Tells you under these circumstances, this is what you'll see and measure. This is what would be the observation. Predictive strength is the sole determinant of validation. God, that's important. It's the sole, and this is why Feyerabend can be against method, because it really doesn't matter how you came up with E equal MC squared or anything else that has found to be scientifically of importance. My father's line was inspiration or perspiration. Doesn't matter, does not affect the validity, does not enter into the validity, is not part of how we assess its legitimacy. Leading us to what? We're saying that validation and method are entirely independent. Now, they may not be in terms of batting averages or what you do, but it's interesting, even when Laplace tried to tell us exactly how he did what he did, it was a combination of, I think we should listen to this guy. He's made more discoveries in a broader area than anyone since Newton, and he took where Newton handed us and ran with it. Maybe we should listen to him. And others said these methods are impossible, they would never work. It turned out, I think Laplace was correct. Let's talk about this model ranking and grading and be done with it. You have this, you can pull this offline, it sits in front of you. A conjecture is an incomplete model or analogy to another domain. Okay? This is the instant when Claude Shannon said that information is like entropy, it's like energy. It should be measurable. Hypothesis is a model based on all, and really the heart of this is hypothesis, because you turn your conjecture into a hypothesis, it has some requirements, and as soon as it delivers in one instance delivers the goods, it now can make argument to being a theory. But a hypothesis is a model based on all data in its specified domain with no counterexamples, right? We can't know there's a problem with it going in, while incorporating a novel prediction yet to be validated by facts. Remember our forecast of a measurement, right? A theory is hypotheses with at least one non-trivial datum. Done an experiment, done a test, and found it held. Prediction validated. Does it mean you're done? Probably not, right? You still need p-values, right? No, we'll come to that. A law is a theory that has received validation in all possible ramifications to known levels of accuracy. you probably don't need to worry too much about when you get to a law. Be nice to just come up with a theory that makes a non-trivial prediction of a measurement and turns out to work. Now, there's a lot here, but I'm going to show you how simple it is for the debasement to turn this modern science into postmodern science. And as I suggested earlier, it relates to prediction. Okay, so let's make the flip here, and here it is debased. Number one, modern science is inductive, where conclusions follow premises with probability and not certainty. God, I love that. I got that from Martin Gardner in Scientific American as a kid. And you see differentiations, delineations of induction and deduction regularly, and about from the seen to the unseen, from the specific to the general. But it really works powerfully to lock on to induction being where the conclusions come from the premises with probability, and deduction where they come with certainty. And so this is in our nomenclature here, the probability of the hypothesis of the data is between 0 and 1. That's the modern science view, that your probability, and that there is a probability of a hypothesis, that it would come between 0 and 1 versus being true or false. And the postmodern science that we've found that has impacted universities, and where this ends up, where we find this, and I failed to mention it, but the medical infection of the postmodern science is really the reason for the total interest here. It's in health that we find the greatest examples of the infection, and for the very reasons that we can give here. The demarcation of modern science from non-science is the predictive power of the models of science. Popper chose falsification as demarcation between science and nonsense, was his terminology. And I can hand him this. Falsification can be seen as a necessary requirement for a meaningful assertion, but a scientific assertion has a requirement other than being meaningful. Okay? It has to make a prediction. The historical progress of modern science comes from the improved predictive strength of its models. The irrationalists, here we are introducing Popper, Kuhn, Lakatos, and Feyerabend. They are the philosophers of science that are the overwhelming dominant force in academic philosophy of science. And it is to this day largely deductivist and supported by an inferential statistics that doesn't use the predictive strength of the model as the sole rational trust, but has left in its place null hypothesis significant testing and peer review. And so we see studies published that pass with flying colors the null hypothesis significance testing. They have great p-values, but they're not making novel predictions. And what they are is trying to show an association, a link between one thing and another, and then using, I think, the p-values to imply that there is a relationship of a causal nature when there's not. So this is the debasement, and I want to just take some time to look at null hypothesis significance testing and, in fact, the p-value for a moment. I know this isn't the most exciting topic in the world, but the p-value is the probability that, so you have an alternative, and like Matt, lean forward. You have some hypothesis that you're trying to show, something that has an effect, presume positive or not, but you want to show that this has an effect. And so you form a null hypothesis that there is no effect. And then you in a wonderful bit of ad hocery, get to choose a test statistic, and we make the assumption that the null is true, and then we get a probability for that data. And the problem with it is that it can logically shed nothing of importance on the subject of an observable. And you're dealing in a realm of inferential statistics where the probability of a hypothesis doesn't even have meaning. We can only talk about the probability of data. And what that means is that we now have a philosophy of science in practice at the university where we have flensed validation. The very thing that Elon needs to see to make SpaceX do what it needs to do, make those rockets do what they need to do, has been removed. And if we look at what it was replaced with, and by the way, this isn't my gripe. The griping about p-values and their misleading impact and the bad behavior they inspire and the over-certainty they cause is coming close to a 100-year history, near 100 years. Here's a fella, his name's Lambden. Somehow we picked up another I in there between the B and the D. But he's writing from Intel. Imagine that. Imagine someone from Intel weighing in on p-values. I would think it would be important. Where we do see p-values in use is around quality control. It makes a lot of sense in that space. And I would imagine that Intel knows as much about quality control as any entity on Earth. But you go through here and you look at the things. I'm not going to make you do it all, but I'm going to make some comments about them. A p-value is the probability the results will replicate if the study is conducted again. That's false. It is not, but it is widely believed to be that. We should have more confidence in p-values obtained with larger n's than smaller n's. No, in fact, that we can show that expanding the n will drop the p-value to whatever you want it to be. You can expand your sample space to make a p-value of your choosing. We'll show you how that's done. A p-value is a measure of the degree of confidence in the obtained result, not a rational confidence, absolutely not. You're standing on that probability of the data side of things, and you can make no important assertions about an observable on the other side of that. That's just how that's going to be. But what's so fascinating here is that we can go through these. They all hurt. Look, a p-value is the probability that the results obtained occurred due to chance. Very popular, but nevertheless false. Part of the way you can know it's false is nothing's due to chance. Chance can't cause anything. Chance is your ignorance. That's all. It's when you just don't know anything. No knowledge. That's the state of chance. So let's look. So this is the guy from Intel. Dale, flip me here. And let's go to our friend Gerd Gigerenzer, someone we've brought around the community, talked to. This is eminently readable material. There's no one here that can't go onto the internet and pull down Gerd Gigerenzer's piece on mindless statistics. And by the way, Dale, let's throw that other one back up here. There's some rather unfair and nasty language here. It comes right from the literature, technical literature on p-values. Ritual, sorcery, surrogate science, delusions, fad, idol, and dirty little secret. Those have all been used over the space of about 70 years to refer to the mischief around p-values. See, there are people that called the replication crisis before it happened. There are people that said, hey, this doesn't end well. Look what you're doing. Look what you're doing here. Okay. The ritual one, it was Gerd Gigerenzer that in mindless statistics used the word ritual, and someone had objected to that, saying that most people don't even know what the p-value is. They can't even tell you what it's supposed to be. And Gerd responds, that's exactly right. That's an essential requirement of a ritual. If you knew, you'd stop doing it. And boy, that's a biting one here. But this is a list. These are very much like the other ones that Lambden gave us. But it's a shorter list, and some things kind of emerge that you can see. You have absolutely disproved. Look, we don't disprove or prove anything in science. It becomes probable or less probable. But the null hypothesis, no, I don't even need to know the structure of the sentence. You're claiming it's showing something about a hypothesis. It is not. It cannot. Next one, you found the problem. No, hypothesis again, p-values can't do that. It can't tell you anything about your theory or your null. Only about the data that you obtained from it. Well, it's an important distinction. It's so crazy important. And the blurring over it, the missing of it, they're like, yeah, whatever. And by the way, this list, this time, these are things, these were pulled of academics and asked which of these, they may all be false, which of these are true. And I think it was close to 92%, it picked at least one of them. And they're all patently, deadly, absolutely false. You've absolutely proved your experimental hypothesis is that there is no difference between the population means no. You can deduce the probability of the experimental hypothesis being true. You cannot. You know if you decide to reject the null hypothesis, the probability you're making the wrong decision. No, you have none of that information. That is not there. And these things are believed. And then the next step, we take this, okay, so people are sitting in their stats classes and they're not listening carefully enough. They're students kind of like I was, and they're watching someone or something else and not paying attention, and they're coming out with these common misunderstanding, right? Now, it was taught and is being taught, and in fact, I have here in this book a Introduction to Statistics for Psychology and Education by Nunnally. I have here just in 3 pages, all of these false assertions about what a p-value indicates. I have a generation of scientists that were raised this way, that have been taught this. What Jeff was doing, Gary, is he would look at the paper we'd hand him, and he'd find the statistician, and he'd get back and see if they were a frequentist or not, and with what kind of fire they burned their frequentism, and then tell you whether he had time to read the thing or not. So what we have is, and look at this, each of these things lends itself to what? To the imprimatur of what? Validation. Look at them, the probability that you'd get the same results if you did it again. Why do it again? This wasn't caused by chance. We found a very real effect. Look at them all. Each and every one of them gives the promise, the suggestion, the stamp of validation, and each is false. Is that a coincidence? Are they used? It's funny because when you corner guys on what's wrong with p-values, nothing if it's interpreted right. If you say it the way I said it, like I do with my math teacher looking at me, almost nobody knows what it is. And they have settled upon, and these are scientists, these are guys published in medical literature, and what they've settled on is a personal understanding that gives heavy implication to validation, to predictive strength, where none exists. Let's go to the next one. This is a defense of p-values, and if you remove all of those improper implications, right? All those misunderstandings, there's nothing wrong with it. You're left with something fairly innocuous, which basically tells you nothing worth knowing about observables. It's a good test of your data against a test statistic. Fair? Potentially? No, not even that. I put in this paradox of p-values, finding it insufferably upsetting that all you had to do is increase your sample size and you could get the p-value of your wanting. And then I found it right here. The paradox of the p-value, the associations between the p-value, the sample size, and the significance level. The figure shows that the p-value goes down as the sample size increases in the binomial experiment given in the text. The paradox lies in the fact that given a particular significance level, say 0.05, one can increase the size of the sample to obtain a p-value that is significant. That seems pretty easy to Jimmy. And people are what? Clapping for your larger n, right, Mike? Let's go to the next one, Dale. I put this out here because it's going to come up again and again and again, and I plan on doing others of lectures like this on related materials. But I want to point out some things that are man-made tools of science that do not exist in nature, And to think they do, to confuse the man-made abstraction with something real is to commit a reification. And we're already on the subject of that with uncertainty and probability right here without even sharing that would be something that we could talk to students about. But nature doesn't have coordinate systems or numbers or ratios or rates or parameters, values, standards, definitions, scales, none of that. Units, equations, math, graphs, dimensions, infinity, logic, uncertainty, calendar. This one, certainty one. I'd say the difference is as simple as does the uncertainty inhere in the dice, or is it in my head? Where does it sit? And there's two answers to that, and it's debated and discussed, and you can imagine either being correct when you think about it hard enough, but one of the answers will lead you to science that won't replicate, and that is if you think that it inheres in the object and not in your head, which is a crazy thing to think that 1 in 6 or that the 50-50 of the penny is a measure of what's in your head and not a quality that inheres in the penny per se. So I put this up because it'll come up again. We can just talk about uncertainty now. And you know, if you wanted to look at this further, and this is exactly what students would be faced with in an exposure, again, the idea I think here is to teach kids what science is, and maybe most importantly in that regard is what science isn't, and to do that ahead of trying to learn about the solar system and periodic tables. And I think the periodic chart just got removed from some schools' curriculum. Is that right? Did anyone else see that? Yeah, I don't know what, can't imagine what the offense was. Books for further reading. David Stove's Popper and After, Four Modern Irrationalists, 1982. Anything Goes, Origins of the Cult of Scientific Irrationalism, 98. And Scientific Irrationalism's Origins of a Postmodern Cult, 2000. I think those are three of the best books ever written on the philosophy of science. And lucky for you, they're the same book. And so if you get any one of them, you can say you've read the other two and you won't be lying. What a thing that it took 18 years of publishing with different titles to try and get someone to look at them, and still no one would. And so Emily and I in our Broken Science org initiative purchased the rights to that book. And the problem was this: we're turning people on to it, but the book goes from $4 to $45, and what we're going to do is clean it up, put it back on the net as a PDF for free, and then offer something bound and nicer and a little more permanent for people with a real interest in books you hold. Probability and humans, inductive skepticism, the rationality of induction. My personal journey was I struggled through David Stove's work and tried to entice all of my friends to look at David Stove's work. And when I was done, I sat on the material in my head for about 6 months, and I said, if David Stove is correct, and I believe he is, that science grounds in induction, which grounds in probability theory, if that's correct, there should be someone in the world of probability theory on the other side of the world looking at this problem that has seen what David Stove has seen from the math, hard science side of things. And as soon as I had that thought, I went on to Amazon and found E.T. Jane's Probability Theory, the Logic of Science. And it is that work that brought me then next to Matt Briggs. I was able it was a crazy thing, but I could put a seeming failure of modus tollens into, I'll let someone else tell the story in detail, but the oddest search for a human being ever. I put in, if the baby cries, we beat him. We don't beat the baby, therefore he cries. I put that into Google and I found Matt Briggs. And I knew that whoever had found that odd bit of thinking, is bizarre, right? It's a logical, a seeming problem with modus tollens. And it was mentioned by David Stove in one of his books. And I was looking at the material in Stove's book and wondering, I can't be the only person that's read these books. There's got to be someone else. So there's like 4 or 5 of us. And I found the other guy. My father's Evolution in Science. You know, I've lived the book. I can't really speak to it, but there are other people in here that have read it. And much of the material that we've presented here came from that, and it was material that he developed as chief of development, head of development at Hughes Aircraft Company, Internal Research and Development, in their glory years. Dr. Briggs' Uncertainty is a brilliant work. I think he's an amazing character in that he's in my pantheon of brilliant philosophers of science, and he's still living. So that's such an upside in terms of talking to him. Unless you got some of this stuff, if you want to borrow my Ouija board, yeah, to hit the others up.
We'll call you on this.
Gerd Gigerenzer, Mindless Statistics, Surrogate Science, you know. Here he's 11 years later, help somebody, the same damn problem. And he's explaining that this thing's all going to come down like a house of cards. And in fact, it did and has. Eminently readable. David Bakken was very, very prescient in 1966 about the whole problem. It seemed to be largely unnoticed. Trafimow and Michael Marks, their Journal of Basic and Applied Social Psychology, banned p-values, and it's a delightful editorial, fun to read. Wasserstein and Lazar, this is the American Statistical Association statement on p-values, you know, sounding the alarm. I bring this up because I don't think this was coming without what Trafimow and Marks had done. And then I've got Briggs again with Trafimow in the replacement for hypothesis testing, which is a suggestion that rather than testing hypotheses, why don't we test for what we're really after, which is the probability of a hypothesis, deliverable, the measurement of an observable, right? And so this got weird. It was science wars and meta-science. If you take just the material that I've given you here today and made such a stink of prediction that it is the sole basis for any rational trust in science, that it is the reason for science being the objective branch of knowledge, if you then look through these things, just throw them into Google, demarcation problem, foundation of statistics, philosophy of science, it's amazing how much you've picked up. It's amazing what a sharp tool that is. It's like being a kid and being handed a Leatherman tool or something. It really works wonders on a lot of these conundrum. For an academic pursuit here, the idea is to de-emphasize the deductive roots of Hume, Pearson, Fisher, Neyman, Popper, Lakatos, Kuhn, and Feyerabend, and replace them with Bayes, Laplace, Polya, Jeffries, Cox, Shannon, Jaynes, and Stove. What's interesting, I think, telling, is that our improved pantheon has one philosopher. The one that has created the problem has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 philosophers in it. And our heroes here, Shannon, Cox, Jaynes, Polya, Jeffries, Laplace, and Bayes, each made monumental contributions to hard science independent of their work in this field, with the exception of Bayes, whose singular work was in this space. And some food for thoughts. I think these are kind of cool. It sums up a lot of what we're doing here. My launch of this effort began with reaching out to people that knew more about this kind of thing than I did. And I hit them with, when predictive values replaced with consensus as determinant of a model's validity, science becomes nonsense. That's just what we're talking about here. And what does that consensus look like? It looks like your good p-value, right? You get the sign off from the stat and published in the esteemed journal, the favored magazine. Popper, I do not believe in definitions, and I do not believe definitions lead to exactness. Science, I do not try to define it. Definitions are either unnecessary or unconscious conventional dogmas. To which my father responded, Popper eschews definitions and then defines things. You can find all sorts of contradictions in Popper. I thought that was cute. It's fun. It's also annoyingly accurate. Because you're here, Matt, this is after 4 chapters of uncertainty, which is as tough a thing as you'll ever read, but nothing more important, I don't think. We seem to sum up so much of what we read with this single sentence. Chance is unpredictability, which is a synonym of ignorance, which is what random means. And I just think that's so good, and it's such a fun one to grow into. And this by Briggs, the real problem is all parameter-based inference. Parameters tell you nothing worth knowing about observables, prediction does. That speaks directly to p-values. That's an all-parameter inference. And tells you nothing worth knowing. It's funny in the literature, it's often referred to as the thing we really want to know. It's always that dirty little secret, that thing we really want to know. And we're trying to infer the thing we really want to know from the data, and it's incomplete. The more absurd, meaningless, or nonsensical your theses, the odds of successfully fooling academics with your work increase in direct proportion to the number of words and pages spewed. Okay? And it should have been increases, but someone find that for me. You've got it. If you do, there's a reward for you. I'm looking for the author of that, or a first instance. Okay? A little more deep here, Michael Crichton, Andromeda Strain, Jurassic Park, Harvard physician that never practiced a day of medicine. He says, I want to pause here and talk about this notion of consensus and the rise of what has been called consensus science. I regard consensus science as an extremely pernicious development that ought to be stopped cold in its tracks. Historically, the claim of consensus has been the first refuge of scoundrels. It is a way to avoid debate by claiming that the matter is already settled. Whenever you hear the consensus of scientists agree on something or other, reach for your wallet because you're being had. Boy, let's talk about things that kind of get better with time, right? And here's Richard Smith, 25 years CEO and editor-in-chief of British Medical Journal, okay? CEO and editor-in-chief. Stephen Locke, my predecessor as editor of the BMJ, became worried about research fraud in the 1980s, but people thought his concerns eccentric. Research authorities insisted that fraud was rare, didn't matter because science was self-correcting, and that no patients had suffered because of scientific fraud. All those reasons for not taking research fraud seriously have proved to be false, and 40 years on from Locke's concerns, we are realizing that the problem is huge, the system encourages fraud, and we have no adequate way to respond. It may be time to move from assuming that research has been honestly conducted and reported to assuming it to be untrustworthy until there is some evidence to the contrary. That's very recently. It's very recently. And it's damning. Go through the list. He means these quite deliberately. No patients had suffered because of fraud. That it was rare. That it was self-correcting. And from Richard Horton, the mistake, of course, is the thought that peer review, and he's editor-in-chief of Lancet. And then we have the other big one was New England Journal of Medicine. I've got quotes from Marcia Angle there on the FDA's regulatory capture being 100% and has been for 30 years. But the mistake, of course, is the thought that peer review is any more than a crude means of discovering the acceptability, not the validity. And we learned here today that in modern science, validation comes from the predictive strength of your model. Of a new finding, editors and scientists alike insist on the pivotal importance of peer review. We portray peer review to the public as a quasi-sacred process, ritual even, right? that helps make science our most objective truth teller, but we know that the system of peer review is biased, unjust, unaccountable, incomplete, easily fixed, often insulting, usually ignorant, occasionally foolish, and frequently wrong. And then I leave you with another one from my dad. The worst taco I ever had was pretty damn good. And we've got tacos and some drink here. Thank you. Any questions?
Coach, I have one question.
Yes.
The purpose behind your whole initiative,
Yeah.
what is the end goal? Is it just pointing out the faults? Is there an end goal of influencing?
A little history too. You know, I'm not an endpoint guy. I'm a process guy. And I know that if anything's going to improve, it would, like, what was the CrossFit Health mantra? Let's start with the fucking truth, right? And as long as we're lying to ourselves or in denial, nothing's going to happen. But specifically, I believe a societal or institutional fix to be absolutely impossible. I have no dreams of that. Just in the sense that I don't think there's any cop that thinks he's going to be such a good cop, there won't be any more bad guys, right? It's not that kind of thing. But I think what we can do is, in leading CrossFit, I kind of got forced into this everyone, anyone distinction. And I'd had a journalist that was teeing off on me, about to hit me with this, you got to admit it's not for everyone. And I've heard it so many fucking times. I never had answers for it. And this time it just came out of my mouth. I said, yes, but it is for anyone. And the difference between everyone and anyone, we all know what everyone is. Anyone is he or she that rogers up and goes, I'm your person. And it got me to looking at the literary notion of everyman. It's a capital E. It's a somebody like St. Nick, everyman, right? And I think not enough has been made of any man. And that's a different kind of soul. And so I don't have anything for every man, but I have something for any man. And if you want to really think about these things, then I think we can make it a matter of school curriculum. I'm certainly going to arm my children with this. But I think what we can do is free people from the tyranny of shitty science and its purveyors. And boy, is this a good time for this. I don't know if any of you, if this resonates with anyone here or not, but I think there's a profound need to start telling people what science is and what it is not. My dad was of the view you couldn't adequately understand what it was if you didn't know what it wasn't. And so we had that list of all the things that predicting stuff, you know. Science isn't going to tell you if Janie loves you or not, and whether Bob's going to ask you to the prom, right? It doesn't work in every province, never claimed to.